Hey everybody, I'm Rick Beato. On today's Sounding Off, we have legendary bassist Victor Wooten with us. That's coming up next. Okay everybody, we got a special guest today who needs no introduction, but I'm going to introduce him anyways. It's Victor Wooten, who's one of the world's greatest bass players, 5-time Grammy winner, Rolling Stone top 10 bassist of all time, and he's with us today on Sounding Off. How are you, Victor?
I'm doing well. I'm honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. We were just talking a second ago about your camps that you do that you've been doing for 18 years. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Yeah. Like you said, this is our 18th year. We started in the year 2000, and at that time we did one camp a year, and it was only for 50 bass players. But it went well, and I was just having a blast. From that very first camp, we had quite a few of our students go on to really do some fun and big things, playing with Luke Bryan and Beyonce and Soundtribe Sector 9. Some of our students are doing that, so that was really fun, and we wanted to keep doing it. So we eventually quickly actually went to 2 camps a year. But it was still only bass players. And then I think it was the year 2007 or either 2008, my wife and I purchased 150 acres. And with the help of past students and a few other friends, we built a retreat center that we call Wooten Woods. And now we're in our 18th year, and we do camps for any instrument, vocalists, anything, whatever you play, we feel that we can help you. And we're doing more camps a year. We do a camp this year. We're doing a camp every year from April through October. We do something every month, rather, from April through October. And so there's all types of different things. We do a theory camp. We do a thing called the Spirit of Music. We still do our original camp, which was only for bass players. So that's our bass nature camp. And we do a songwriting camp this year, all sorts of things. And what I was telling you earlier was the nature connection to the camp. Mm-hmm. And that came when in 91, after reading a book called The Tracker, I started taking some outdoor classes with a guy named Tom Brown Jr. And in learning about the outdoors and, survival and awareness and things like that, when he was talking about all the outdoor stuff, to me, it was music. I told myself, this guy's teaching music. But for me, even more importantly than that, it was how he taught it that I felt that, wow, this is the way music should be taught. Don't lock yourself in a room and spend all day doing something. You don't become natural that way. You don't learn a language in a room by yourself. So in the year 2000, well, first before that, I started using a lot of his nature exercises and turning them into music exercises. Mm-hmm. And they were working. And to cut to the chase, in the year 2000, we did our first camp, which I still call a bass/nature camp, because now I use some of Tom Brown's former instructors that are nature instructors, and they come to our camp and they teach some outdoor things. And it's not all, okay, we're going to track animals, we're going to make fire, even though we do that for fun. Uh-huh. It's a lot of awareness exercises that teach you how to listen better, how to see better, even how to walk better, but teaching you more about yourself, because it's yourself that plays the music. And so we really, really delve deeply into that. And we find that it helps. It helps people.
Victor, are you originally from Idaho? Is that correct?
I was born there. I was so funny. I was just asking my older brother, Reggie, about that just 2 days ago. I think after Idaho, we may have had a short stint in Virginia, and then we moved quickly to Hawaii. My dad was in the military. From Hawaii, we went to Sacramento, California. From Sacramento, California, back to Virginia.
Nice. Yeah. And you're from a family of 5, and you're the youngest, correct?
Yeah, I'm the youngest of 5 boys. So that's the story, is that my brothers were already playing. So when I was born, they needed a bass player. And that was me.
So you got a small bass and started playing very young, right?
That's right. Like your son, I was doing it very, very young. I was lucky enough to be out gigging very, very young. Reggie said I turned 6 during a tour when we were the opening band for Curtis Mayfield, and we were his opening band for a while. So, as far as I know, I've never not done it. When we were living in Hawaii, we would play sometimes in our front yard and things like that. And, I was right around 2 years old or so. And I just had a little toy Mickey Mouse guitar that you could wind up, and it would play a song. But I would just strum it along with my brothers. It wasn't about put your finger here, put it there. It was just play. The same way babies are allowed to baby talk. You don't make them speak correctly. You just let them do it for years first. That's what I did first. I just played, got the rhythm right, and I learned the language of music before I learned to play it.
How instrumental were your parents in getting your brothers to start, your older brothers to start playing music?
Well, directly, none.
Okay.
Because even though our parents were musical, they weren't musicians. They listened to music, and when we got into it, they totally supported us and took us to concerts. But I think the way I hear the story, my three older brothers, Reggie, Roy, and Rudy, they're all, between the three of them, there's only 2 year difference. So they were all born right after each other. So they saw a band one day and got excited. And there was a couple hours, I believe, after school, they'd have to come home and be by themselves for a couple hours before mom got home. And even though they were very, very young, they were disciplined enough to be able to, babysit themselves. But they saw a band one day and got excited. And they called mom up at work and said, "Mom, we have a band." She said, "Okay, we'll practice, because when I get home, I want to hear it." So they practiced. They worked on it. When she got home, they played for her. And they just never stopped.
What kind of music were your parents into?
I mean, you have to think they're from I don't know what year they were born. I was born in '64, so they're going to be the 40s, 50s. What I really know is that, like, on the weekends, my mom would put on these gospel records and things like that. My dad loved to sing country music songs because he grew up, like, on the weekends, or at some point the radio would be strong enough for them to hear the Grand Ole Opry from Nashville. So my dad loved a lot of that old country music, Burl Ives and all these guys. So he would sing a lot of that. But they would take us to see everything. I remember seeing James Brown probably in 1970 and 71, which would have put me in kindergarten in the first grade, but I can still remember the concerts. And then in the 70s, Motown was hitting really hard. And so we heard a lot of that. But I do know that my parents listened to a lot of gospel and, Mahalia Jackson, Golden Gate Quartet, a lot of that stuff. But again, my dad was also into country music and listening to those singers.
So your older brothers, though, by the time you were aware, you were 5, 6, 7 years old, they had already developed their own taste for the kind of music they liked. And what were they playing then, and what did they like?
Again, by the time I was 6 and 7 years old, we're now out doing gigs.
Yeah.
So, and again, this is the Motown era. So we were hired to play a lot of soul music. We played a lot of that. We played James Brown. We did have some originals back then. But it was, we would do the Four Tops, Temptations, Sly Stone. We would do a lot of that soul music. But because of my parents' influence, and because of also because of the fact that pop radio or pop music at the time, pop was not a style of music.
Right.
Pop just popular. So, I'm sure you remember, there would be jazz stations. There might be classical stations or rock stations, but the pop stations played whatever was popular.
Really eclectic. Any kind of it would just be acoustic, rock music, then rock bands, then it'd be Motown, then it was just everything.
Absolutely. Imagine that. I mean, we have to just daydream about that. I mean, nowadays you only get that on someone's iPod. You get everything like that. But we had radio stations like that played everything. As long as it was popular, they played it. And that was our pop music. You heard everything. So because of that, we were influenced by everything. But, 5 black kids, we got hired to play black music, R&B and soul music. But as we got a little older, my brothers were into Van Halen, and Reggie's learning all this tapping stuff. And then for me, I'm 9 years old, 8 years old, and the fusion scene hits. So now we've got Tony Williams' Lifetime. We got John McLaughlin's Mahavishnu Orchestra with Billy Cobham on the drum. Return to Forever with this young guy, Stanley Clarke, is happening. And I'm talking Weather Report before Jocko, even. Miroslav,
yeah.
And Alfonso Johnson. And then when Jocko finally hit, it like blew everything out of the water. So I was lucky enough to be very young and playing music during this heavy, influential musical era. And that's not even to mention the straight ahead guys. You had I also had Miles and Train and all these
Sure.
guys that were still alive, So it was just a very, succulent time for music, bubbling, time for music. There wasn't, even though we had separate styles, it still felt unified, The Beatles were there, and it was a great time to be learning. And so, by the time I'm 9 and Return to Forever's hitting, Reggie's not teaching me my parts anymore.
You're figuring it out yourself.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've got to take the record, put the needle down, listen for a bit, pull the needle off, find it. Where is it? Put the needle back on. Oh, I'm close. I got to wait,
I tell that story. I tell that story
it.
all the time about dropping the needle. People nowadays, kids can't even. You got to wait. Oh, it was too early that time. I got to wait for it to go through again. You're trying to get that one little spot,
But you're always hearing it in context to the rest of the music. It's not tab. It's not some kind of machine that pulls the bass part separate.
Or a slow downer.
Or slow it down. Right. No, you're hearing it in context. And so you're learning so much more than you realize.
Yeah.
And by learning it by ear this way, and playing along with the record, during this one line of Stanley Clarke, I'm getting louder when he's getting louder. I'm getting softer, and you're learning all these nuances that can't be written on the page.
Would you say that transcribing, I mean, you're talking about transcribing, and I consider transcribing doesn't have to be writing it down. Would you say that that's the way you learn the most? Would you agree with that?
Other than just playing with people.
Yes, ensemble playing.
Yeah. I mean, I had the opportunity of being born into a band, so I played a lot. So, I might put that one as first, but transcribing still, that was even if it was a James Brown song, I had to learn the bass part and learn verbatim. So that was transcribing. So yeah, but transcribing, but having the place to play it, just learning it and practicing yourself does do good. That's a good thing. But if you can use that knowledge in a real context, because that's how we learn to talk. We don't learn words and say them in a room by ourselves. We learn words and we use them with people. And the words we learn, they garner a response, and the music's the same way. You learn the stuff, you play it, people respond. That's what really teaches you even more than just learning the music. So yeah, transcribing a lot of it.
I actually have 4 brothers myself, so I've got 4 brothers and 2 sisters. But obviously and I'm 2 years older than you, very similar. I was very into Motown. I was into all the same kind of music that you were into.
Like I was just at a family reunion over Easter, and I saw one of my aunts, my mom's baby sister, who just hears music. I mean, I wish I could bring her to a place like Berkeley and do a class or a talk on music, because she knows music better than a lot of the musicians that I know and plays nothing. She has no instrument to get in the way, but this woman can hear music. She hears it and it gets all in her skin and she just like twitches if it sounds right, And a lot of us, we've just forgotten that, everything has to be right. I have to know what note to play. My strings have to be this tension and all that. And she doesn't let any of that get in her way, man. She hears it, and she was one of the people that when we were young, she would say, "Oh, you boys, you have to listen to this. Victor, this is Willie Weeks playing with Donny Hathaway live on the song Everything Is Everything. Listen to it solo."
That's
So she would turn us on to it. And then one of my mom's brothers played a little bit of saxophone, so he was into jazz. He got my brothers into it, and for me, I was just doing whatever my brothers did. I was the baby. I was just following them.
You work with kids all the time. You teach at Berkeley. How do you feel about new technologies that have happened since the internet, but things like YouTube, where people can learn, where they can go, if you want to learn one of your bass solos, you can go watch you do it and teach it. Or if you want to learn, what do you think about that?
Well, every generation, every year, there's new technologies. And the technologies are only tools. So I can't say that they're good or bad. It's how we use them that make them good or bad. So I was talking to a class today, and I was talking about Bach, because I heard a bass player playing a Bach cello suite. And I was saying, just imagine back in those days, 1600s, right? No recordings. To hear their music, they had to write it down and find someone to play it. Out of all the great music we've heard, there's probably even just as great, if not greater, that we never heard or even never even gotten written. So what they had to go through. So now then there's a technology of maybe the phonograph, and there's always going to be the old school people who think it's bad or some who think it's good. I see somebody.
This is Layla. She can't hear you, but you say hi. That's Victor. Say hi, Layla.
Hi.
Baby, can you go back upstairs?
Hi.
Yeah, you're playing the iPad. Go ahead. I'll see you in a bit. Okay. Don't.
How old is she?
She's 4.
Nice.
She's 4.
How many kids do you have?
I have 3 kids. So my son Dylan's 9. I have a daughter Lennon that's 7, and Layla's 4. Layla, take my change and go upstairs. Go on, baby. You're gonna take all my change here. Here, there you go. You go put it in your bank, okay?
Tell her save some for me.
Save some for Victor, he said, baby. Here you go. All right. I'll see you in a minute.
Yeah. Kids are fun, man.
They're the best. You have kids, Victor? You got kids, right?
4.
Yeah.
4. Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Okay. It is, but it's worth it. It's worthy. And my mom said, you'll either raise your kids or wish you had, And so we got to raise them, They need us. But every generation gets new technology. We have things our parents didn't have. They have things their parents didn't have. But it's how we use it. And we have the ability to take this technology and to be able to have it make us better faster.
I was going to say, what kind of things inspire you musically? Like, what is something that you're into right now that you're listening to that you think is really great?
Well, it's not always what I'm listening to, because we don't get inspired to talk just by things we hear or other talkers, right? We talk about what happened to us in life. Life is what we talk about. So for me, music is just another way to talk. And so whatever inspires me in life, like just over the weekend, I rode some roller coasters with my kids. Next time I play, that comes out. But just to look at music, there's always new music, new bands, new musicians, all sorts of things, and as well as old stuff. Like I played Stairway to Heaven for a class today, just to let them listen to the last 3.5 minute guitar solo at the end, which I never really listened to as a kid. I don't know if I ever made it to the end of that song. But Steve Bailey, when we were doing a camp on rhythm sections, he pointed this out to me. He said, listen to the rhythm section at the end of this. And the guitar player takes a solo, and the guitar solo is burning, but he's not doing a whole lot different. He's just basically playing the root really fast, maybe a fifth and a minor third, and over. But what the rhythm section does behind him, that's what allows you to listen to that solo for 4 minutes. It's what the rhythm section, how they're changing and making that repetitive solo work. So for me, it's that kind of stuff. Sometimes finding old music and rediscovering it is just as inspiring as finding new music. There's been a lot of great music over the years, not even looking forward, but the old music, there's no way that we could have heard of all of it. Even to find that old music and rediscover it is inspiring. But more so, it's just life, man. For me, it's just everything that happens in life. Life for me is more beautiful than not. And even the things I don't like about it, even the things I don't like is inspiring to me to play. So my first answer is what inspires me is going to be life.
Tell me about bass players that you were influenced by. I mean, I've read things, but are there any bass players people would be surprised by?
Probably so, because people probably really know me as what might be called a jazz musician. So, the players like Stanley Clarke, Jocko, of course, Larry Graham for the thumb, of course, that's going to come in. But one of my gigs I wish I had was watching Billy Sheehan play with Steve Vai and Greg Bissonette backing up David Lee Roth.
Yeah.
Man, that was like my dream gig. Oh, man, I wish I could do that. Just get up there, swinging your hair around and acting crazy, spinning your guitars around your neck. That kind of stuff was fun. But even listening to players like Paul McCartney, as musical and lyrical as he is on the bass, And I will say, many of the bass players, when I was really being influenced, I didn't know their names at the time. I wasn't into that. Growing up on all that Motown stuff and all that soul music and the pop music, as we were saying, I didn't know who those bass players were. It wasn't until more like the fusion era, when people like Alfonso Johnson and Stanley started to come along, that I started to pay attention. And I like James Jamerson. I didn't know James Jamerson played on all that stuff until that Motown book came out. I wasn't into names back then. It was really the fusion era. And I knew maybe more drummers than I knew bass players, because I was heavily into drummers. And I would have been a drummer if we didn't already have a drummer in the family. But lots of little boys, we like to beat on things. But that's one of the reasons, that's probably the main reason that I play so rhythmically on the bass. Is I used to learn drum solos. I used to learn a lot of drum licks and Billy Cobham licks and Tony Williams and Lenny White licks and stuff. I would learn those on the bass, not on the drums, but on the bass. And so that's what's really influenced my playing as much, or even more so than bass players, is the drummers. Especially for me on an instrument like drums or piano, where you're holding a pair of sticks. You're not even really making contact. It's a stick or a piano key, where you're hitting a button. You're going to hit the same button that I hit.
Right.
But some way I can hear it and you say, oh, man, that's Chick Corea, or, oh, man, that's whoever. Bruce Hornsby even, Whoever. That, to me, is amazing. But Alvin definitely has his own sound. And you hear it, you know it's him.
We both grew up when like you said, when Miles Davis was alive and Coltrane was alive, Wes Montgomery was alive. I mean, all the greatest jazz players were alive. We grew up through the fusion era.
Yep.
What do kids miss nowadays? Do you find that kids that study with you at Berklee, for example, are they aware of these different movements, or is it just a blur?
Well, well, everybody's different. There's some that are aware, some that aren't. Like I meet bass players who know me but don't know Stanley Clarke. And we're still both alive. And,
right.
And I came totally through that Stanley Clarke era. So some of the young bass players are starting with me, which is like, what? So yeah, a lot of them are missing out on a lot. But we're the same way. I don't know all the bass players before whoever. There's no way to know it all.
Sure.
But the I think a lot of the players today, when it comes to jazz, I'll just speak with jazz. I believe many of us only go back so far. We go back to the Miles, Train, Bird era, and not before. Which is, in my opinion, which is why a lot of us jazzers these days think that when we play jazz, we're not allowed to smile. We have to have short hair. We have to be cool, wear a suit. We come from that era because the people who did it, Miles and those guys from that era, did it. But I can explain to the people at Berklee, we don't know why they were doing that. They were doing that to make a statement.
Yeah.
Because the era before, Louis Armstrong, Cap Calloway, those guys, I mean, they were performers.
Oh yeah.
They were dancing, zoot suits. They had dancers. It was like a whole show.
Yeah.
But in order for a lot of blacks to be on TV or to do the big shows, you had to do that. You had to smile. You had to act a certain way. But then a group of musicians came through and said, look, we're not doing that.
Right.
We're going to play our music. If you don't get it, you don't get it. And they didn't smile. And I believe our era looks back to that era and says, oh, that's the way we do it. So I see these young kids at Berklee, one of the most expensive schools. These kids, they're not married. They don't have a mortgage. They don't have kids. They're not even paying for their education. Someone else is paying for it.
Right.
And they're bored when they're playing. What are you doing? You're telling a musical lie. This isn't your life. Your life is wonderful. Smile.
What do they say when you say that?
So, they just chuckle. They laugh and chuckle, of course. But, with every generation, there are things we gain and there are things we miss. There's both. Overall, I do believe that music is in good hands. Your son as an example, and you as an example. There's great music everywhere. And every older generation likes to say, well, back in my day, it was, and I don't want to fall into that category. I realize that we gain and lose with every generation, with every technology. And basically, I'm still in the music business. So rather than complain about what's happening, I got to find my place in it. There is YouTube. People aren't buying records. We're at a place now where we want our music for free, but we're willing to pay for television. When we were young, it was the reverse.
That's right.
So, hey, that's where we are. Who am I within this? If I don't like it, can I do anything about it? And if not, where am I in this? It used to be the record making business or the record selling business. We can still make them, but we can't sell the records anymore. So where am I? And rather than complain like a lot of us old folks do, I find my way of existing. And one way that I can exist and help is by teaching. Because, the young players will always play faster and more, but they can't buy our experience.
That's right.
There's nothing they can do to gain our experience. And so we will always have that over the younger people who are stronger, faster, and slicker. They don't have our experience. So we always have something to offer, and I'm always ready to share that.
That's that they can't buy our experience is that is pretty profound. I love that.
Yeah.
That is really profound.
You can buy my bass. You can buy the same bass, the same strings, the same amp. You can buy my transcriptions. You can buy my records, learn my licks faster than I learned them. You can't buy my experience. You can read about it. You can read it. Doesn't mean you have it. Doesn't mean you understand it, right? And that's what we can share with people to ready them to have their own experiences, But having your own experiences is what the life is about. And, once you've done enough of that, then you can share those experiences with others.
How did you bring up your kids as far as music is concerned? Did you, how do you, as a parent,
Sure.
Did you involve your kids in music from the beginning, or did you kind of do what your parents did? What did you do?
When I saw your videos online, I did a little research on my own because I think that we think kind of similarly. And I want to say, hey, how did this kid learn this? Because I say maybe he was born with perfect pitch, but there's some learning involved because he knows what he's hearing. So what happened, And like you, I started my kids very, very young, but at times, most of the time, they didn't know what was going on. So I, playing pitches, playing music, asking questions. I record in my own studio at home. I would bring them in the studio and ask them questions as if I really didn't know the answer or if I really needed help. Hey, which verse do you like better? What note should I put here? Is this in tune? All these kind of things, And then when we finally got a piano in the house, then it was piano stuff like, hey, the microwave just went off. What note was that? Well, I don't know. What do you think it was? Well, sing it. Bing. Well, what note was it? I don't know. Well, go to the piano, find it, things like that. And then they tell you, by how they respond, they tell you what they need to know next, or they tell you how much they've learned. Like, I remember doing this with my kids. They'd have to go to the piano and find a pitch that they heard. And they'd go to the piano, and I'd make them guess first. Well, what note you think it is? Oh, C. Okay, well, go play a C. Well, I don't know where a C is, So then they got to learn a C.
Sure.
But finally, they learn where a C is, and that's growth. But then they hit the C, it erases the pitch they had heard in their head. Now they can't remember what they were hearing, so you have to remind them. But then as they grow, finally they can remember what they heard, hit a different pitch, and figure it out. Or maybe they're hitting the same pitch sometimes, So always doing little things like that with them, as well as having them perform with me on stage. That was from early on, from my first child, always singing, dancing on stage, giving them the opportunity to do it. And at the same time, there's always instruments around the house that they know they are free to play. But even with the piano, even as a toddler, I did not let them bang on it. They could play it, but you can't bang on it. I wanted them to respect the instruments. And even at my house right now, there's a bass guitar sitting out on a stand that they won't touch because that's Dad's. But their instrument they can play, and they won't touch it, and neither will their friends. So the same way little kids, there's words they can freely say, but they won't because they know, I shouldn't say that word. They have their choice. They're learning. They're learning respect. They're learning restraint. They're learning good behavior, and not only in life, but with music too. Instrument's mine. Go get yours. Ask Dad first. Don't bang on the piano. So they're learning the reverence and the respect music for at least what I think it is, and hopefully they will grow up believing in it also the way I do, or maybe even in a better way than I do.
Wow, that's great. I don't perform myself really, so that aspect of I used to play, but I don't really play anymore because I've been a producer for the last 20 years or so. So I didn't play for the kids a lot. I played them music all the time though, and I interacted with them and sang with them and played them chords and did things like that. But I didn't because of not being a performer anymore. I wouldn't play my guitar or the piano for them very much, but they were always immersed in music.
Same here. It's a heavy immersion with the opportunity to participate. Yeah. And so my kids are all musical, all four of them. Three of them perform regularly, and the youngest one, he'll do stuff at home if you're not looking, but he doesn't like to perform, unless he's on a soccer field. Then
okay.
he'll go. Yeah.
That's amazing. Do you have any projects that you're working on right now? Do you have any solo projects or anything you're working on? What are you doing creatively right now?
Absolutely. I'm actually working on a new record with Dennis Chambers. We've been touring since last year together as a trio. Dennis on drums and a saxophone player named Bob Franceschini. Yeah, and so we are almost done with the new record that hopefully will be out in just a short few months. So yeah, that's the newest thing. But I'm also writing the sequel to my book, The Music Lesson, and I'm hoping to have that out next year because next year is a 10-year anniversary of that book.
How do you find time to do that, to work on your book? Where do you find the time to do that? When do you do that?
Yeah, well, you have to make the time. 24 hours is really a lot of time in a day. And we have to make it really is. It's a lot of time. It may mean that we sleep less. It may mean that I spend less time playing Candy Crush. It may mean that I'm typing while I'm eating dinner or whatever. But you just have to find the time, and lately I've been spending a lot of time on a tour bus. So on a tour bus, I've been mixing this record, literally.
You'll mix on headphones then?
Oh, with headphones, absolutely. And then I'm letting the guys hear it and see what they think. And then, in the dressing room in Minneapolis before the show, they're setting up the gear, but we're recording a sax solo. You just fit it in. The thing is that there's time to do whatever it is you want to do in life. That's what I believe. There's time. We just have to sometimes make that time, or better yet, schedule the time properly. But the time is there.
I was saying to Dennis the other day that we were talking about recordings back in the 80s that he was doing, and that I made this observation that all the fusion drummers of the 80s had better drum sounds than the rock drummers of the 80s, which was amazing because all the rock drummers had all the sampled snares that were always 20 milliseconds late with all the reverb on them, and they had no punch. And I said all the jazz guys had the incredible cracking snares with the super punchy kick drums, and it's like then all the bass players had better tones than the rock bass players too. And I was like thinking like, that made no sense. They should have gotten the fusion guys to come in and coach them on their sounds. Coach the producers on how to get the right sounds.
Absolutely. Yeah, Lenny White was really good. My brother always talked about Lenny's drum sounds.
Yes.
And actually, his mixing qualities. I guess he mixed. I don't know if it was Romantic Warrior or one of those big Return to Forever records. My brother always talked about how good Lenny White's drums sound. Yeah.
And as far as you doing engineering and things like that when you're working on your own records, how much of that do you do?
A lot, a lot. That's the blessing and curse. That's the blessing and the curse. The fact that we can do it ourselves, you know. Yeah, you know, I mean, doing it myself allows me to be able to work whenever I want in the studio. I can wake up middle of the night and go into the studio and get it done. I can hire a drummer, you know, I remember my first session of not having an engineer, and I had to mic up the drums and plug it all in and get the patch bay happening and all that. I'm so happy that I can do that now. Even though it might be better with a real engineer, a real producer, but it sure does save time and money not having to go that route.
Oh yeah. Typically, when you're
Yeah.
recording your own bass, will you run a DI line and mic the amp at the same time, or do you not mic an amp? Do you wait till after?
I'll do both. No, if I'm going to mic the amp, I'm doing it at the same time. So I keep an amp set up, ready to go. But I say more times than not, I just plug straight in, meaning through a DI and straight in. And a lot of times because I have an idea and I want to get it done quickly.
Sure.
And I don't feel like sound and all that stuff, you know.
What kind of mic pre will you plug into?
Like lately, I've been using this new thing. It's by API. Maybe it's called a transport or something like that. Now, my buddy Steve Bailey turned me on to it. He's a bass player. He's the chair of the bass department at Berklee, and so he turned me on to this thing. It's got some EQ on it and compression. So I've been using that a lot on this record. But I also have a Radial Firefly. It's a yellow. My Control 24 board has Focusrite preamps in the back. I go straight into that a lot. I have a few different things that I try, but with Béla Fleck and the Flecktones, we tried a bunch of things, and the things we liked the best was just a little tiny Stewart direct box, and we plug right into that.
What if you're doing something like you're doing some looping? Would you put your pedals together and go into a mic pre, or would you actually play through an amp so that you're getting the...
Well, I've never done any looping on a recording. I'd rather play the parts and loop that rather than go through the pedal. Like on this new record that I'm doing with Dennis, there's some parts on there that I will loop live.
Yeah.
Sounds better if I just play the parts on the recording than going through a looping pedal. But there's some other things too where I'm using like a whammy pedal or some other effects that I do want to use the pedals. Yeah, I'll go through those and then go into the DI, you know, and then maybe I have to beef up the EQ somewhere, you know, either after it hits the Pro Tools or before or whatever. But yeah, it's the pedals and then a DI for me.
If you're recording this new record and you and Dennis are playing as rhythm section, will you track your main bass part live with Dennis at the same time? I mean, will you track together?
Yeah. But for most of this record, we haven't been able to do that. Did it for a few songs. I flew Dennis and Bob in for 3 days, and we got some of the stuff done at the same time. And yes, some of it we tracked at the same time, but with the goal of getting a good drum track, of course. And then I'm go in and fix a few things. And Bob on sax the same way. But in a lot of the cases, because I'm home alone working on this stuff, I get a lot of tracks done with some type of Pro Tools drum loop. And I get all my basses parts done, and I might even cut up these drum loops to make it feel sort of like a kind of cool drum beat. And I might send the parts to Bob, and he'll do his horn parts in New York at his house. You know, so a lot of it was done that way. But the drums, I had Dennis come in to my house, and then we recorded, and I had Bob come in too, so we were able to record some songs all together. But then I was able to add Dennis to a few songs that I had already done. As well as the first song we did, we added drums here in Boston at Berklee. And it was cool because they have brand new, incredible studios.
Yeah, I've been down there. It's amazing. They've got great rooms there.
Yeah. And we were able to do it with a class. So a recording class, you know, with an instructor. We're able to bring the students in, and they did the whole session for us. So it was great for them and great for us because they got to do a real session that's going to be on a record. Their names will be on the record, and we got a set of it. and they got experience, and we got a recording session because it was hard to find time to get together.
Sure.
With everybody's schedule. Dennis is crazy busy.
Technology has changed so much with the ability to record on your own. I mean, back in the 90s, all the records you did were done in studios, right? I mean, and then now with Pro Tools or Logic, whatever you're using, everybody is an engineer, right? You've become an engineer. When did that thing start? When did it start where you're like, okay, well, I got to track my own bass. Oh, I've got to mix my own stuff. I got to mix the drums. I mean, you become an expert at all that over time, right?
Well, I wouldn't say an expert. I have a few phone numbers really close by every time I'm recording. I can call my friend and say, hey, wait a minute, how do I do this? For me, that started when I can't remember what year, maybe my second record. My first record, my solo bass record called A Show of Hands, was done on an ADAT, 2 ADAT machines.
Okay.
Which actually sounded good. I loved the sound of the ADATs.
Yeah, they were good.
And then I went out and bought DA88s, and then I went from that to Flecktones. Béla finally bought Pro Tools. Flecktones started recording on Pro Tools, and Béla eventually started doing that on his own. We weren't going into the studio anymore. And then eventually I bought Pro Tools. But the first session I ever did from the ground up was 2008.
Okay.
And it was for the record I did with Stanley, Clarke, and Marcus Miller. It was a SMV. And I was working on a track called, it wound up being called Mongoose Walk. And I had my friend Derico Watson come over and play drums. And he set up the drums and we figured out what mic should go on a snare. I'm like, I don't know, let's try this. And then I had to patch, because I do have a drum room at my house, which is nice. And, patch into the wall and then figure out how to get it into Pro Tools on the right track and all of that. And that was the first one I did without an engineer. Because for years, even on my own records, I would use another engineer. Even though I was recording in my own studio.
Right.
Use an engineer. But I always paid attention, and I take notes. So I write things down, because if I ask a person a question, I don't want to have to ask twice.
Do you find it satisfying though when you're doing the things yourself? I mean, I know that obviously the fact that you can control when you work on it, you don't have to depend on anyone. If you want to get up at 3 a.m. and I'm going to go down and mix a tune, or I have an idea for a song, you can do it whenever you want. You don't have to rely on anyone. That's incredibly helpful, right?
Oh man, very helpful. Very helpful. The fact that, my kids can come downstairs and say, hey, Mom says dinner's ready.
Right.
All that kind of stuff. And my kids, I have a couch down there that folds into a bed, and my kids used to come down there and just fall asleep while I worked. And I could carry them up to bed one at a time.
Oh, that's great.
That's also pretty much why my kids are on all my records, too, because they've always been down there just hanging out, and I would use them. My daughter, my firstborn, has been on my record with her heartbeat before she was born, which was my second record. And they've been on every record since. So I love that. But I still say that's the blessing and the curse of being able to record your own records at home. Yeah. Is that that's the blessing, is you can do it at home, but that's the downside too. So I getting records that don't sound as good, Yeah, to be able, I mean, again, that first record where we got the drums plugged in, and they sounded good. I mean, we literally, like, what mic should we? I don't know. Let's try this. I mean, it just sounded good, and and in the end, that's what's on the record. Yeah, and we know that we did that, and it sounded good. Yeah, it is like you said, it's liberating and it feels good. It is. It's empowering, and it's the downside of doing things at home. The nice, back when I used to record in studios, it's nice to have other people to do stuff for you, to when all you have to do is focus on your performance and you're not thinking about, I got to patch this in, I got to patch that in. I mean, there is a certain pain to that. But if you have your setup where it's so fast, where you just patch one thing in and you're ready to go. Right. That's really where it's at then. Exactly. And that's the cool thing about being able to have it nearby or at your home, is that it can pretty much stay ready to go. I write and record from the bass out. You know, like I may record to a click of some sort so that I can go back in and then add some loop drums. I used to just record to a click and then literally with a drum machine go in and like play the beats on the pad, you know. But now the drum loops are so good. You got
They're
real
so
drummers,
good.
you know, make playing time to any tempo. So I usually will play to a click and then I'll go back and add drum beats and change them and come up with some good stuff. You know, even with this record that we're doing, I've got Dennis Chambers, world's greatest drummer, on it. He's hearing some of these drum loops and say, nah, he'll like, I don't want to touch that. Keep that, you know, because they some of them sound so good. So we've got, you know, there's sections of a song where it's a drum loop, but
Sure.
then another section where it's Dennis in the same song. You know?
Well, Victor, thank you so much for being a guest today. And thank you really for doing all the things you're doing with kids. I mean, I think it's really fantastic. We need more of that in society today. That's a serious commitment. I really honor that. That's so great.
Oh, well, same here. I appreciate it. You know, what you've done with your own children is amazing. And it's inspiring to all of us. And for me, it kind of helps prove a thought in my mind that I've always had, that you know, perfect pitch can be enhanced or taught even. For me, it makes less sense that all of us musicians don't have it.
Right.
That to me is more confusing than the few people who do have it.
Yeah.
I don't understand why we all don't have it, you know. But what you did with your own kids is inspiring to me, because you know, what you've done really takes it so much further than what I've been doing with students to help better their ears. You know, the way you've done it, I think a lot of us can learn from that. So maybe we'll talk about that.
I would be honored. I'd be honored. Thank you so much.
And thank you, man. Thanks for just speaking with me and wanting me on your show. You know,
My
I'm sure
pleasure.
you know, but you and your son have been inspiring a lot of people, you know. And your son, you know, he probably doesn't even need to know, but he's been inspiring a lot of musicians around. Everybody's talking, you know. And what that's doing is it's raising the bar. And whenever the bar is raised, it brings us all up, you know. And because again, I've never heard anybody with ears like that at whatever 7 years old when he was in those videos, with the knowledge to back it up, you know. And you get a lot of credit for that. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it. That's very nice of you to say. Thank you so much, Victor. You're a good man, and let's definitely be in touch.
Absolutely.
I'd like to thank Victor once again for being our guest on today's show, and remind you to hit the subscribe button and also the notification button so you know when these videos are coming out. Thanks again for watching. I'm Rick Beato.